So this is on page 514, and here's how the graph reads. The growing trade deficit. And what this graph shows is on the x-axis, time between 1988 and 2009. And the percent of GDP in the U.S. So how has the gross domestic product, or the total of all the goods and services in a year that the United States produces, what is that percentage based on imports and exports? So in 1988, if we were just talking about describing these lines, the blue line is exports. And in 1988, about 8 or 9% of the GDP was in exports. And that continues until 2009, when about 11% of GDP was in export goods. And one of the things that you might want to look at is there any trend in that line? And it's kind of hard to like sort through, but is this changing at all? Well, there is kind of a trend, and I'm going to see if I can show that. Here, if you were to kind of draw a line that was the average, you would see that that's increasing. When you're analyzing a graph like this, you don't want to just worry about where the beginning is and where the end is. You want to look for a trend. And there's a general slight upward trend in the exports. You could say the same thing about imports as well. That the imports, the percent of GDP that was in imports was at about 11%. And then there's ups and downs, but generally it's trending up, and it peaked at about 18% of GDP in 2009. And then it trailed off. So the ending point then is down here at about 13%. Still, you have that upward trend. And that's going to be something that if on the AP exam you're given a graph to describe, then you want to look for those trend lines. So they might ask you to describe a trend, and that's what you want to look for. The other thing is that when you compare imports and exports, what can you say about these two differences? Well, it's pretty clear that imports make up a higher percentage of GDP than exports at any time during that period between 1988 and 2009. That's a way that you can practice analyzing those graphs. One of the things that I wanted to point out about globalization is that Thomas Friedman, who's the reporter and writer for the New York Times, pointed out that even though we have outsourcing of jobs, for example, the classic outsourcing of call center jobs to India, he points out that those Indian call center workers are using Microsoft Windows. They're in air-conditioned offices where the air conditioning units are made by Carrier, which is an American-made air conditioner company. And Coca-Cola, they're all drinking Coca-Cola too. So, he says that it sort of balances out, that even if we lose jobs, American companies still produce jobs, and it's just a change in those jobs. And I think that one of the things that this emphasizes is the importance of Americans being flexible in their ability to do different kinds of jobs and to go from one job to another.